Hi, I'm Louise Towler from Indigo Digital. We're a WordPress design and development agency based in Hertfordshire, and I'm here to talk about WordPress and website accessibility and why we don't give our clients a choice. As Dan said, I'm MD of Indigo Tree. We're a small but mighty agency in Hertfordshire, half an hour north of London. There's 14 of us, and we build websites for small and medium-sized businesses. So we don't tend to get involved too much in enterprise. We've got a couple of larger clients. But I personally believe that everybody deserves an accessible website. And so we do our best to really, really work very hard with our clients to help them to understand why it's important as well. And then I have a little side project called Canopy, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So a few of our clients, we work for a small organisation called Stop Scams UK. They work with a lot of large banks and telecoms to try and campaign and about legislation and about things to try and stop some of the scams, like the sort of email and mobile phone scams that they don't actually get involved in reporting and fixing the scams, but they're trying to campaign about awareness of the scams. We've just built a lovely little website for a charity, Thin Blue Paw, that helps support ex-police dogs, because after they retire, they don't get any funding at all for any sort of medical or vet bills or any sort of ongoing help. And then we have firms of solicitors, and solicitors particularly, they're regulated by the SRA, who tell them they have to have accessible websites, and typically most of them don't, even if they think they do. And finally, we've got a learning management system built in LearnDash for the Chartered Institute of Business Schools to help them deliver some online learning as part of their Help to Grow, which is funded by the Department of Business. And again, accessibility was a key part of that. So none of these sites are massive. They don't get loads of traffic, but they've all been built to be as accessible as possible. So what is accessibility? I'm sure that I know a lot of people in the room have sat through talks, and in fact, the first accessibility talk I ever heard was from Graham, who's sitting at the front here. So not nervous at all about this, but essentially what I'm talking to our clients about primarily, if they're UK based, is making sure that they are delivering their services in an accessible way. And we have quite a few clients with physical premises where they go to a lot of trouble to build the ramps and the handrails and make sure everything's accessible to people with a wheelchair. But actually, if that person with some sort of motor disability can't access their website and find out where their office is located or their site is located, and can't find out where the public transport is, and can't access to find out more about that organisation, they've got no reason to even know they exist and want to go and visit them. So even for organisations which don't think of themselves as particularly digital, I think it's really important that their website is accessible. And it's not just about making it accessible, it's about making sure you give the right information to people who might need to know about accessibility and what you're doing to help. We've got some clients with European customers, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are aware there's a new Accessibility Act. It's been on the cards for a while, but it's, I believe, going into sort of law and being all legal in about June of this year, where actually organisations in Europe are going to have to make sure that they are delivering digital and apps and websites in an accessible way. And then there's loads of lawsuits in America because lots of people like suing other people and making money, especially if you use accessible overlays. I believe there's been some interesting stuff going through. So it's far better, in my opinion, to make sure your website's accessible in the first place than try and rely on a third party. And when we're talking about accessibility, what I'm actually talking about is WCAG 2.2 AA, because that's actually the standard that if you can meet that standard, then essentially you know you're going to be in a good place. Okay. And basically what they're saying is you must take reasonable steps to make sure your services are accessible to those with disabilities. And reasonable steps, in my opinion, is if you can pretty much meet the WCAG 2.2 AA, then actually you, at that point, if anybody has any sort of issue, well, you've got an accessibility statement on your website and you've got the contact details so they can contact you and try and find the information out in another way. So why do people struggle? Well, most of us, when we think about accessibility, we're thinking about things like somebody perhaps who's blind, who needs a screen reader. They might have some sort of physical disability. And I always think of my mum, because she's not disabled, but she's got the most terrible tremor in her hand and can't use a mouse at all easily. She has to put two hands on the mouse and try and sort of move it around. So sometimes it's not people who think of themselves as disabled, it's actually people who have some sort of impairment. Obviously people who can't hear, but then also you have to think about people who might have a cognitive disability. And we work with some charities who are providing services, and their service users are going to be under quite a lot of stress when they're wanting to find out about the service. And one of the things to do is think about what it's like when you're really stressed and you're trying to access a website on your mobile phone, and you've probably got a really low cost data plan and it's a cheap Android device. And how on earth are you actually going to find what you need to know to get over this awful situation you may be in? And that cognitive disability doesn't have to be a permanent impairment. It might just be someone really at the end of their tether and not sure how to do things. And if you can deliver that service to them via their mobile phone, then actually you're genuinely helping them, and that's not about them being permanently disabled. When it comes to training our clients, and we talk about these things, I often refer to these posters. They are published by the Home Office. You can go and sort of do a quick Google. And actually, I often send them PDFs of these because they really explain very clearly to people who perhaps don't think about being disabled in their everyday lives the sorts of things that make a difference. And I think it's really important. We did some user research with some of our Indigo Tree marketing managers and people who edit their websites. And everybody we interviewed, of the 12 interviews, none of them really knew anybody who was a close family or friend who was disabled. So they had no experience or knowledge of what it was like for people who cannot, see with two eyes, hear with two ears, and possibly, the sorts of people who maybe can't use a mouse and have to try and access the websites in another way. So these types of posters are really helpful when we talk to our clients, because, as I say, we don't actually give them a choice anymore. I've had the odd client say they don't have any customers who are disabled, so they don't need an accessible website. And I basically sort of try and politely say, well, you probably don't have any customers because your current website's so rubbish. If you look at the standard, often people think about what it means, and there's an acronym called PAW, perceivable and operable. So perceivable is being able to access the content with different senses. So a good example of this is if you have an image, you can see it. If you put an alt tag on an image, somebody with a screen reader can hear it. And then they know what the image is about. And making sure text and backgrounds have enough contrast. Color contrast is the bane of my life, to be quite honest, especially with brand designers, but that's another story. Operable is things like people with physical needs. So can you actually tab through the entire site and use the site without having to touch a mouse? Can you give people enough time to read content before it changes? Is your navigation really clear? But then also there's things like, often you see people with really badly damaged phones. Maybe they've cracked their screen. Maybe something's broken. Can they still access what they need to be able to do if they can't actually use all the features of their phone? Understandable is making sure that it's really clear. And that's where some of the cognitive comes in. Making sure the contents and writing's really clear. Not changing and coming up with all sorts of whizzy designs just because you think it's going to be really helpful. We sometimes have designers and clients say, well, I've never seen this done before, but I quite like it like this. And I'm like, there's probably a reason why it's not been done like that on any other website, because actually it's not going to work for quite a lot of people. You know, if you have a consistent way, one of the things I don't like is when you make me think when I'm on a website. I want it to be fairly intuitive, because if I can't work it out, heaven help the person who's not so digitally savvy as I am. And then robust is really making sure that the code works well, especially with things like screen readers, making sure there's not loads of errors and bugs. And that will help if assisted technologies move on. There's a lot of stuff, people are talking about AI, but somebody somehow has still got to access that content in a way to be able to parse it and deliver it in a way that the user wants. And in fact, there was some research by the Government Digital Service at the end of last year. They published a blog post where they were checking government-funded websites and websites that had had grants from the government. And there was still a significant number of sites that were meant legally to be accessible, and actually they weren't. And these are the top 4 issues. So just insufficient color contrast. I mean, I'll talk later about why there's just no excuse for that. Things like lack of visible focus. So when you're tabbing through a site, you can't actually see where the actual focus is. And then not being able to use a keyboard. And finally, sites that aren't really adapting very well to different sizes of screens. And that's not just going from desktop to mobile. That's what happens if someone needs their screen size at 400%, because they can see it, but they just need everything magnified. So it's, how does it work when things are magnified? Does it still make sense? Is everything still available to them? So I thought this was really interesting, because these are all sites that definitely should be accessible. A lot of our clients don't have to be from a legal perspective because they're not being funded by the government, but these are sites that, and they're still not getting it right. So we talk about the benefits with our clients, and actually we talk a lot about the commercial benefits. So if clients are going for those government tenders, anything above 5 million in the UK, there's loads and loads of procurement stuff about sustainability and accessibility and all of that. If they have international customers, and then we have quite a few not-for-profit clients. We had 3 of our quite large multi-million-pound local charities to us last November, all email us the same form, because Hertfordshire County Council had got some grant. They all wanted to apply for it, and they all needed to fill in the same form about whether their website was accessible or not. And as I was saying to someone earlier, one of them, we'd just rebuilt their site, so that was easy. The second one, it was okay. The site was a little bit old, but we actually immediately went and sort of did a quick check and fixed a few defects and came up with a good accessibility statement for them. And the third one, I'm about to sell them a new website. So the stats at the moment, these are stats from Scope. I'm sure there's more recent ones, but essentially 1 in 4 people in the UK have a disability. And in fact, often it's higher than that, because people have temporary impairments. You know, there's the person sitting in bright sunlight trying to read your really pale text on a grey background, or there's people who perhaps might have broken their arm and just can't use a mouse for 6 weeks while it heals because it's in a cast, and yet they've still got to try and access the web to do their job. So that's quite a low estimate. But essentially, why would any customer, any client of ours, want to remove 25% of their potential audience from accessing their services in a digital way? And as soon as you start talking to them about that, they all start nodding and going, yes, okay, it's probably a good thing that we should do anyway. So what do we do at Indigo Tree? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our actual development process, and I'm conscious there's some bigger agencies in the room, and I'm sort of got a bit of an inferiority complex here. We don't do massive sort of agile and really big website projects. A lot of our website projects are sort of 3 months end to end. So we do things in sort of little mini sprints sometimes, but essentially we have quite a straightforward, more traditional waterfall approach. We start off with some discovery. We go into a design phase. We go into a development phase. Sometimes development and QA. At the moment, we've got a relatively large project going on where the front end has been QA'd, but the back end is still being built, and we're doing some clever bits. But essentially, we have development and QA and content, and then we launch the site. So what I'm going to talk about now is all those different stages and how we build accessibility in all the way through. So we're not getting to the end just before launch and going, oh, we better check what we've done. Actually, all the way through the project, we're making sure that it's just about in every single sort of major conversation, somebody's going, is this going to work in an accessible way? So first of all, at the discovery stage, often we've spoken to our clients when we're quoting for the work. We talk about the fact that we want people to be able to access their content. With our clients, often they're providing the content for us. Either we're migrating from an existing site, or we talk to them about employing a copywriter. Sometimes we refer them to video production companies. Sometimes they have an illustrator doing animations. But essentially, we've got to make sure that if they produce a video that's an explainer that they want to go on their homepage, they've thought about the fact that it needs subtitles, and that's built into the quote that they go and get. And, ideally, actually, they have a transcript of that as well that we can put close to the video. So we talk about it at the discovery stage because it's too late at the point when they've already paid the video production company to produce the video to then come along and go, oh, well, you didn't think about this, that, and the other. We have to basically be educating them all the way through. How do they want these things to work? And sometimes if we're doing some integrations, like we're integrating with Salesforce and there's something going into a form with an iframe, well, we actually need to make sure that that is still going to work in an accessible way, and that whoever is designing the forms that are going within the iframe knows what needs to be done to make sure that they're built in an accessible way, because we're not controlling that content. It's coming in via an iframe. We can pop it on the page, but we can't necessarily do much to style it, for example. So I often use this with our clients as a way of talking to them. Most people, they want you to build a website that's functional. They expect it to be reliable and they expect it to be usable. Is it going to be convenient? And when I mean convenient, I mean, is it going to be simple to use? And actually, is it going to be pleasurable to use? And putting that hat on of someone who has some sort of impairment or disability, or can't quite use a mouse, or has to have their screen that little bit larger. Are you making their life easier, or are you making their life harder? So often when we have these conversations, it's about trying to get people to put themselves in the shoes of someone that maybe they haven't thought about. And then what's the impact if you don't? Well, you end up with digital exclusion. You get a whole swathe of people who just can't access things in the way they need to. You get all sorts of ableist barriers because people make all these assumptions. There's also an ageist thing, and I go back to my mum here because I'm always thinking, how would mum manage this? If we've built a website and my mum can't access it and it's a business to consumer site, then the chances are it could have been built better. And then you get issues with fraud and inefficiencies and all sorts of other things. So that's the impact of poor design. But actually, if you have good design, you get a great website, you get all your accessibility, privacy and safety. And then my little canopy sustainability hat, I also normally start talking about things being fast and quick and low data and reducing the carbon footprint. So when it comes to design, we don't take any prisoners. We put all the colours from, if we're doing branding for a client, obviously we have quite a lot of control. Most of the time we don't have any control over the brand because they're coming to us with a brand already, but we do a brand review. We work out what colour combinations are accessible. We talk to them about images and graphics, and if someone's really got great ideas about how they're going to embed loads of fancy fonts and text into lots of images, we try and talk them out of it, and then we look at the typography and the fonts. So when it comes to colour choice, it's really quite binary as far as I'm concerned. I know there's lots of ways of measuring things, but essentially 4.5 to 1 colour contrast. It's either going to meet that or it isn't, and if it doesn't, and if the client's not prepared to compromise on something, then I expect something in writing from them to say they're happy for us to build the website in full knowledge that it will not meet the AA accessibility for colour contrast. Because actually I consider that quite an easy one to win at the design stage if you get it right. And we've actually built our own colour contrast checker because I got so fed up of trying to explain to clients. So you can see it at contrast-checker.indigotree.co.uk. you put in all the hex colours. So these are all the brand colours from our brand guidelines. And then you move the little slider and it shows you the ones that pass at 4.5 to 1. And then I would include that in the proposal. If I know that we're dealing with an existing brand, we also include it in the brand, in the design brief that we physically write to the designer, because designers, they sometimes they're not so good with numbers sometimes. So it's seeing it visually will often bring home to them that it may look nice, and they may think it's okay, but that's not the same as it actually being okay. When we come to do the build, we'll have already reviewed all the designs, and when we look at the theme and building blocks and building patterns, because we're building things in the full site editor, one of the things we do is we look at the typography and all the components that the developer is building. And again, we're looking at how are we going to make sure that those are accessible. And some of them, like sliders, it's surprisingly hard to find a slider that's AA accessible in all aspects. So we've ended up building our own, for example. And at the end of the sort of the sprint or the development process, I actually the developers have to do a demo to me. It's normally half an hour, 45 minutes. I've never once had one where I haven't found something. But basically, I expect it to pass all automated accessibility checks. I will also go on and look at that development server, and I'll check things like the stack order. I'll just drag my browser in. If it looks rubbish, then, that's an easy one. Tab order, I'll just tab through. Does it make sense? I'll come to a minute some of the tools, but I can check the heading structure really easily. Checking hover effects, that's always the bane of my life, because people are great. They'll do all the really clever button and links and stuff, and then they'll forget that there's links in the footer, and you'll have something, a white link, and suddenly the hover effect won't quite have the AA accessibility. And then we always build out a typography page and a components page. The typography page is all the sort of basic blocks that come with the block editor and what they look like, and I expect that to have 0 defects, and from automated testing. And then components is all the sort of the bits that we've had to build a little bit more bespoke, and all the block patterns, and normally it's gravity forms and all the other bits, and it's really basic things like, if I fill in the gravity form and there's an error message, and the error message comes up and it's not showing up in with a sufficient color contrast, then they have to just go and fix it. So there's all sorts of things they have to do, and ideally that theme demo, they'll run through. There's a little agenda we've got. They run through and they show me whether or not it's working or not, and it puts a little bit of pressure on the engineers just to make sure that they've got that pride in their work before the website gets any further. As I say, we do automated tests. We have a developer license of 25 sites, I think it is at the moment, for the accessibility checker plugin, with a pro license. So I just don't expect any defects to show up at that point. And obviously there's not a lot of content in there necessarily at that point, but it will definitely, the typography page and the components page, if they pass, then when you come to build out the content with all the blocks, that you've got a good chance that your pages will pass as well. There's also the Axe accessibility Chrome tool that I use. There's a headings map browser extension, which just really quickly shows you all the headings on a page and if they're in the wrong order or the right order. And then sometimes I also put pages into Wave as well. So all of those are really great tools. This is what the accessibility checker looks like if you've got issues on your website, basically. And if you've got the pro version, it will literally check your website once a week, and you can download a report. So it's really great for doing those automated checks. When it comes to content, we brief our content editors. They know how to add content in an accessible way. I have every expectation that every image will have an alt tag. We're checking the stack order. And even if we're working with like an SEO agency and they've put things in the wrong heading order, we'll fix it. I don't let that get into the actual site itself, making sure the headings are semantically correct. And then after that, we do another QA. So we go through and we repeat a lot of the tests again, but we're actually testing with the content on the site. So we use the accessibility checker plugin. Screaming Frog's quite good because you can pull out a list of, for example, a spreadsheet of all the alt tags on the site, and you sort of can make sure that they're all making sense. And then sometimes you use Ahrefs as well. So these are all really great ways of just getting that quality there fairly quickly, and we're not having to pay for sort of external accessibility testing. And then the manual checks, things like navigating through the website with a keyboard, listening to the website with a screen reader, watching embedded media, making sure that you can turn subtitles on, just using the website on multiple device sizes, which is all part of our QA process as well, and checking that if there is motion on the site, which is allowed, basically there's a browser setting where you can have reduced motion, so you want to respect that. So if someone turns that reduced motion on, it stops any motion that's actually programmatically from occurring. And then you can't manage what you can't measure. So once we've launched the site, we do a lot to train and educate content editors. One of the sites we launched last year, I was actually at the client a couple of weeks ago, giving them an extra couple of hours of our time because they'd got half a dozen different content editors, and it started out really good and got a bit of a pickle in some places. So we've just been in, repeated the briefing. Some of the editors weren't there at our initial training, and we just constantly show them how to do things better. And then we talked them through how to use the accessibility checker on individual pages. So we worked through what their editing process would be like, because these aren't necessarily professional marketing departments. In this particular case, it was a non-profit, and they had lots of people with really busy jobs who were just wanting to post little bits of blog posts and tweak things on changes. And then somebody added some random animated GIF and then worked out how to highlight text with a sort of bright yellow background, and suddenly it all goes a little bit skew-whiff. So you just need to go in and sort of repeat again the benefits of not sometimes taking that creative license that the block editor gives us. And then obviously if they want to have a license to the accessibility checker plugin, actually that's a great way of them just being able to, for themselves, self-serve on the content, because if the theme's accessible, then the only thing that's not going to be accessible is the content. And so when it comes to training, one of the things we've done at Indigo Tree is we've invested quite a lot in training all our entire team. So our project managers have been trained on how to talk about accessibility with clients and what some of the terms mean that are a little bit more technical. All our engineers have had at least a day of training specifically on accessibility. And that was, I believe that was through Hassle Inclusion. I think one of the big banks were giving out some free training places, and I managed to be on their mailing list and bag half a dozen places for our whole engineering team. The Alley Collective has also got some great training courses that we've purchased for various people, just to get our engineers up to speed on what some of the more technical ways of doing things are, to make sure that we're doing things in the best way possible. And if you want to learn a lot about accessibility, I definitely recommend subscribing to the Equalise Digital newsletter, because they're the ones who built the plugin, and they have a regular newsletter and do great webinars as well. And the benefits, well, you just end up with a website that everybody can access. You can, for some of our not-for-profit clients, it means they've got a lot more confidence when they're going out to apply for grants. They've got the peace of mind that legally they are compliant. And it's a cost-effective investment if you build it in, because actually we don't really charge our clients any extra. It's just about the extra consideration and time, really, and PM and thinking about it at the design stage. Everything else flows from that. And of course, if it's accessible, if your content is accessible, it's much more likely to be easy to be indexed by Google. And ideally, you'll have a reduced carbon footprint as well. So thank you very much. Little of a shameless plug. We are Indigo Tree. So here's my contact details.